Wilderness Safaris, we've got, for those of you who don't know, over 60 camps in 8 different countries in Africa. And this presentation is based on that experience. We've been running for 32 years, so on the experience of the company, and also on my doctorate, which I did. I did 1,800 surveys in 6 countries, looking at the socioeconomic impact of tourism on rural communities and trying to understand what impact our camps were having on the communities. So this presentation is based on all of that. So the importance of engaging with communities around protected areas. I think there's no doubt everyone in this room agrees that communities need to value conservation areas, and they need to, through that, we need to translate conservation and tourism successes into tangible benefits that communities can see and feel in order that they will value those protected areas. And there is a direct correlation between the success of ecotourism and community goodwill and support. You saw some of the images that PJ put up of how tight those boundaries are. And if we don't have the community support and goodwill, their attitudes and behaviors will impact on the conservation in the protected areas and therefore the ecotourism product. So Wilderness Safaris is very clear on that the success of our business is dependent on communities. So how do we go about incorporating communities into our business? So the main use that we do is joint venture agreements. This is Damaraland Lodge in Namibia. You heard Kolga talking about the concessions. This is the Torah Conservancy that we have a joint venture agreement with. The community owns 40% of the lodge. Initially, the lodge was built by Wilderness Safaris, and we operated it for 10 years, after which we gifted 20% of equity to the Torah Conservancy. So after 5 years, the community owned 100% of the lodge, and they decided to sell back 60% to Wilderness Safaris because they realized they needed a private sector operator to assist with the marketing and bringing in the tourists. And so we have a 60-40% partnership with the Torah Conservancy, and it's fantastic. If you go to the lodge, the staff talk about our lodge, and there's a great sense of ownership in that. There's obviously also a degree of risk, because if the lodge is not doing very well, as shareholders, they will not get as many benefits as they do in other agreements. We also have community as landlords in some areas. This is also in Namibia at Serra Kafema Camp, with Marion Fliss community, where we pay a set lease fee to the community. So it's not a formal joint venture where they have a stake in the lodge, but we pay lease fees. And I think that is a critical part of what we've learned, is that there are so many different communities that want different things. Some want ownership in a lodge, some don't want that risk. They would rather have a set lease fee. And with those lease fees, there are different arrangements that you can have. A standard lease fee, or a lease fee with a percentage of turnover, plus a set lease fee, and all these different arrangements. And those lessons we've applied throughout all the areas which we've learned, and I think are still applying and still very much learning. In terms of public-private partnerships, we have a lot of relationships with national parks, where we have a camp in a national park in a protected area, and that has no formal community engagement. In those particular cases, we do informal arrangements with the communities through social welfare projects and development projects. And I think the reason why we are focusing a lot more specifically on that as well is that during my research, it came out, I have a paper if anyone is interested, looking at different land management systems and community attitudes around those land management systems. And around national parks, communities has the least positive attitudes. So where there was community ownership or community involvement, the attitudes were much more positive than around national parks. And that is critical for national parks to understand, that the communities are not, they were actually still positive, but less positive. And that is something that we really do need to take into consideration going forward for the survival of national parks. And we have preferred employment of local people. Wilderness employs over 2,600 staff in our areas of operation, of which 94% are citizens of the country in which the camp is located, and 75% are from the local community. With that, it obviously requires a huge amount of skills training and development. And we have a lot of management schools, localized training. We have a system called Lobster Inc., which is an electronic training program where staff can sit in the camp and train themselves on an electronic system, do tests. So we don't have to have trainers in all the remote areas. They actually have a training system in the camp. And sorry, going back to that one, in my surveys, I surveyed 400 staff, and 63% of them said that their job with Wilderness was their first formal job ever. And so the skills training acquired in these positions is critical to future employment and to, obviously, empowerment. The preferred use of local suppliers of goods and services. This is something that also came up in my research, is that the link from tourism and conservation going out into communities is largely still just with employment. The linkages do need to be built further to engage more and more people. And so we are looking at a lot of that. Obviously, with 2,600 staff, we have to feed them. So in Botswana, we have over 900 staff in Botswana alone. We are looking at a community project to supply food for our staff and try and get those linkages, because as a high-end ecotourism operator, using vegetables from villages is often difficult in terms of quality and quantity for the camps. The development of various community and social welfare projects. We get a lot of funding from guests staying in our camps who visit villages, so we facilitate and manage projects in villages. A critical part of that is ensuring that the projects are what the community wants and needs. And so we spend a lot of time engaging with communities, meeting regularly to try and ensure, and going forward, that is something that I really am focusing more and more on, is making sure the projects are sustainable and needed. And our Children in the Wilderness program, we've heard a lot about youth and engaging youth, and so this is something that we've been running for 12 years now, with the motto of sustainable conservation through leadership development. We really do believe that the youth are going to be these custodians of these areas in future. So we have a program where we take children into our camps, and we close the camps to guests, and the children become the tourists in the camp so that they can understand tourism. They can get an experience of wildlife from a positive point of view, not of an elephant eating their crops or a lion eating their cattle. And it's amazing. The children, from the day 1 to day 5 of the camp, the complete change. We also run eco clubs weekly in all the schools that we deal with, and we have a scholarship program as well, because what we identified was that primary education is always free, but a lot of children weren't going any further, but they had the academic potential to go further. And so we are supporting a lot of those children. And then just in terms of conservation benefits, as I said, our business depends on the conservation of the area and the pristine nature of those areas. And so we invest a lot of money in conservation to keep tourists coming to those areas. Last year, in 2013, we spent over $730,000 US dollars on conservation projects. This particular project is the relocation of rhino from South Africa to Botswana. As you all know, the rhino poaching crisis. And we invested a lot of money in securing a core rhino population in Botswana. We have anti-poaching teams and various other introductions of game in different areas to ensure that the product is something that will ensure the success of the business and therefore benefits to the community. So what makes it work? Just quickly, in sort of coming to the end of this, but I think understanding the communities that we work with. I was employed by Wilderness Safaris to do my PhD looking at the impact that they have on the communities to get a real understanding of what is happening in the communities. I think it's critical that the private sector knows the communities that they're dealing with and understands their needs, their socioeconomic situation, and so can work with that. With that now, we're trying to identify community members who have different skills, who are plumbers or thatchers, so that we can use those people in the communities in the business. Obviously, communicating regularly with our community partners, and also involving them in decision-making. I think a sense of empowerment and engagement with the communities is critical. So the key lessons learned over the period and through my PhD, I think managing expectations, for me, I would put it 10 times on the screen. And from both sides, from the private sector's point of view and from the community's point of view. Private sector, as you know, we all want to do things fast and quickly. Communities often require a bit more time to consider things, and I think managing those expectations of, especially if a community partner is going to engage with the private sector right from the beginning, setting the expectations of what everyone wants to achieve out of the partnership and where we can go. And ongoing communication, not just when there's a crisis or conflict. And that is what I've definitely seen in the last sort of 15 years working in communities, is that often the private sector and communities only meet up when there's a conflict or a crisis, and that's too late. It needs to be ongoing and continuous. And another critical one is linking the conservation and tourism benefits to the community. So the communities actually know where those benefits are coming from. A lot of my research, the communities were aware that there were benefits, but they didn't actually connect it to the conservation or the tourism. And that is scary, because then what are we doing? They're not going to value it and therefore preserve it for the long term. But yeah, I think it is just, it's an amazing process, and I think we're all learning and growing through it, and it's something that it's fantastic in a situation like this where we can learn from all different regions, because I think from South America, Australia, Asia, Africa, we all have very similar problems and very similar positive things that we can work together. And so, yeah, just on that, a little note on the Tourism and Protected Areas Specialist Group, I have started this community working group, and so if anyone is interested in joining that, we are trying to develop guidelines for the private sector and guidelines for communities on how to engage with one another and ensure that these benefits are received.